Let's get started. Thank you very much for joining us here today at Labour Behind the Label. This is the Unboxing Marketplace Fashion, Worker Rights and Supply Chains Behind Online Marketplace Consumption webinar. An exciting opportunity to find out about some very interesting research that has been published today. My name is Joanna Ewart-James. I am a trustee at Labour Behind the Label Trust and also Executive Director of Freedom United. Do you feel free to chat function? We've got a Q&A box as well at the bottom. So if during the course of the webinar, if you've got thoughts, share them in the chat. If you've got questions, share them in the Q&A. We'll have a little bit of time towards the end to run through questions. We're going to have some really interesting conversations, so I'm sure people have thoughts to share. The webinar is being recorded and will be circulated afterwards, and also we'll put it on our YouTube channel. But the main reason why we're here today is to look at this rapid transformation in fashion retail through e-commerce. So over the last decade, there's really been an unprecedented change in convenience for consumers, and that's changed very significantly the way that the global supply chain dynamics operate. Now, hundreds of thousands of formerly unknown brands sell fashion on mass consumer platforms like Amazon. Of course, that's great in terms of choice for consumers, but it also results in high levels of sourcing from factories where there's little scrutiny over human rights. So this new report, Labour Behind the Label's new report, which we'll hear about today, presents an investigation into the rise of online fashion marketplaces like Amazon, how those marketplaces interact with third-party brands they host, and the resulting implications for human rights in apparel supply chains. I think most of us are familiar with concerns around working conditions at Amazon warehouses, but as far as I know, this is the first time we're hearing about working conditions down Amazon's supply chain, albeit seller products, all the way to the producers of those products. So we'll be hearing from Khalid Mahmood, who's Director of Labour Education Foundation in Pakistan, and Abbas Haider, co-director of the Pakistan Institute for Labour Education and Research, whose teams trace products sold on Amazon to suppliers in Pakistan and met with workers at small suppliers producing fashion goods linked to Amazon sellers. Anna Bryher, policy lead for Labour Behind the Label, will give an overview first of the report and give you an introduction to the findings. And we'll also hear from Paul Roeland, Transparency Lead for Clean Clothes Campaign International, about the wider movement for retailer responsibility and how big tech interacts with the debate. I think also towards the end, we'll have James Schneider join us too. I'll introduce him when he joins. But first up, let me pass over to Anna to outline the key findings of the report. Thank you, Anna.
Sorry, let me get myself set up here. Right. Okay, can you see my slide, not the presenter view?
No.
No.
We saw it briefly and then it went away.
Okay, that's not working then. Let me try again. Okay. What can you see now?
Yes, we can see it now.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, excellent. Let's get going here then. So, yeah, this report really has been in the offing for about 2 years from Labour Behind the Label. And I think it's really important to say that at the start, because I want to highlight the difficulty that there is around trying to trace products in Amazon seller supply chains. We tried a whole load of different approaches to try to draw the links really clearly between the sellers and the seller data, and then their suppliers, and to be able to find products where we could really clearly link an Amazon seller and the products that they were hosting with a workplace anywhere in the world, and what that looks like. And we tried a whole load of different approaches around like buying seller data, like looking at reverse image searching using Alibaba. There was a lot of different approaches we made, and eventually we did, thanks to the help of the counter, managed to trace products from a long list of UK Amazon sellers with their registered formal addresses to some supplier facilities. But it did take a really long time, and the importance of this fact, I guess, is just that this is an opaque industry, and as we know, where there's hidden working conditions, often that's where we find more intense examples of exploitation. So we undertook this research because we see that this is the direction of travel, really, for where online shopping is going, where e-retail is going, that there's going to be more of these online fashion marketplaces. And so we wanted to dig really into what is the implications of that for worker rights. So yeah, it's an important and timely report. It explores the rise of online fashion marketplaces with a particular focus on the impact of Amazon. We investigated the human rights conditions behind third-party sellers for 3 products, and that included fieldwork in Pakistan, where Pilar and LEF went to go and meet workers at 3 factories, and then we document what the conditions were in those workplaces. But the report also analyses the Amazon seller relationship and what actually formally is required of sellers in terms of compliance with human rights standards, and which we find is woefully inadequate. And then it makes recommendations around retailer due diligence, looking at what retailers should be doing and what is appropriate leverage for that retail relationship, given that it's so significant, with so many thousands of brands now being hosted by many websites, and what that due diligence should look like, which for us should include mandatory transparency of third-party supply chains. So yes. So the first part of the report looks really into the changing face of fashion retail, how consumers are buying today. And what we found from digging into stats about how consumer shopping patterns in the UK was that just under half of all consumer spending on clothing in the UK is now done online. And that sounds quite a high statistic, but actually, according to market research firm Mintel, that's a combination of online only shopping figures, as well as people who are shopping online from major retailers like Marks and Spencer's or Next or others. That a lot of those sales are now being done through websites, through those major retailers and their online offering. And so more of us are shopping online, and the amount that we're spending online is increasing. So revenue from online fashion in the UK was 31.6 billion in 2023, but it's forecast to reach 43.9 billion. That's quite a significant jump by 2027. So that's a bigger share of the total amount that is spent on fashion in the UK. And we found that more than 40% of the UK population bought clothing online last year, which was 28 million people. And that's forecast to grow to like closer to 50% by 2028. So online is a significant part of the way that we shop nowadays, and it's only the trajectory is only up, really. Then we also looked at where people shop when they shop online. So this graphic is actually a Mintel survey from 2022, where consumers were asked as a combination of in-store and online, where do you shop? So we see that Marks and Spencer's and Next and Primark are always the top 3 that people that people are talking about. But Amazon is also really significantly up in there. And then when within that same survey, consumers were asked where they shopped online only rather than a mix of online and in-store, Amazon was quite clearly the most popular location. So Amazon is the really big player in this, who actually often people underestimate in terms of their fashion impact. But a lot of the stats also were about the type of clothing that people bought on Amazon. Basics. There was a skew towards men in who were millennials, who shopped on Amazon for convenience and for basic clothing that they would need in their everyday. There was some interesting reasoning, I guess, also that was found out by Mintel's investigations around why it is that consumers say that they choose to shop online, and it's around convenience and around choice. And so consumers say that it's the ease of price comparison and the variety is the thing that attracts them to online marketplace shopping. So you can see quite clearly, I think, how many traditional UK bricks and mortar brands have been looking at that and going, if actually what consumers want from their online shopping experience is variety, then we can do that. We can meet that. And so we had a little look at how many third-party brands, many big UK retail outlets now host. And while you can see here that, like, M&S and New Look are only really catching up with this. Brands like Next did this massive boost of putting lots more third-party brands onto their website just pre-pandemic, and they absolutely cruised through the pandemic and made quite a lot, and have been really making quite a lot of money in their online business, in that it's more than their in-store retail nowadays in terms of profit. So they got ahead of the trend, and as a result have really been the winners in this recent surge. But you can see also that there's, like, ASOS have 850 or so third-party brands. Sports Direct also have got over 1,000. So the companies are thinking, okay, we want to be able to offer this choice. Let's just get more people in here. But obviously, the biggest people in this are the marketplaces who are set up to be marketplaces as a whole, such as Amazon. But also, it's worth thinking about, Shein, Temu, TikTok Shop. These really big companies also are taking a similar approach to Amazon. They're trying to compete with Amazon in that space, although in a slightly different way, through hosting many hundreds of thousands of sellers as part of their group. And so it's actually, what is the requirement between that retailer and those hundreds of thousands of businesses who they give access to these to these vast consumer opportunities? What are they requiring of them that is really important? And that's what we dug into in this report. And I think it's really important to say also, that each of these third-party brands that we're looking at here in these numbers represents a supply network with many factories and potential human rights risks. This kind of the Amazon and Shein are a nexus for millions of supplier connections, really, if we think about it. So I think it's really impactful what it is that they choose to do and they choose to require of the third-party brands who they host through that for their sales. So the broad findings of the report are that Amazon is not doing enough. So third-party sellers make up the vast majority of Amazon sales. So their own brand goods make up less than 5% of the sales across all product categories. So 65% of their sellers are these third-party brands. And then there's another segment who are companies who Amazon buys the stuff from and then hosts it themselves. But that's really 95% of those are brands who have made stuff that is being sold on Amazon that Amazon has no control over the supply chains of. So it's the big part of Amazon's business. And so if we look at that in terms of revenue, I mean, you know, Amazon makes 638 billion globally, but I haven't got my figures in front of me, but 25% of their sales are within are from fashion on the marketplace. And so it's, you know, this is a lot of money, a lot of products. And so we looked at what is the actual requirement that Amazon makes over the sellers, because Amazon basically relies on a contract. So they require their sellers to sign a contract that includes language prohibiting forced labor and prohibiting non-compliance with local legal standards in production. But really, it's a couple of paragraphs in a 30-page document. And it doesn't, as a matter of course, ask for supplier locations. It doesn't ask for evidence of due diligence, and it doesn't ask sellers to disclose anything about their risk assessments over social and environmental harm, all of which we think would be really crucial as a baseline of checking whether forced labor or exploitation was involved in the products that they were hosting on their website. They do have something where they say if they receive credible allegations of a violation within the supply chain standards, then they can request further due diligence and reserve the right to terminate the seller's store as a last resort. But really, given like our difficulty, for example, in tracking where goods are made, and actually tracking third-party seller supply chains, it's almost impossible for people outside, NGOs, worker rights campaigners, unions, to be able to raise complaints about human rights that are actually linked to Amazon sellers, because that transparency is not there. And despite there certainly being many credible allegations of human rights abuses in these supply chains, the likelihood of being able to raise things through the Amazon complaints mechanism so that Amazon can bring those allegations through a due diligence process is almost non-existent. So our hypothesis, basically, when starting to look into the seller supply chains, is that the lack of rigor over third-party sellers is likely to be leading to brands with limited or no ethical sourcing policy increasingly sourcing from lower cost suppliers where worker rights protections are fewer and conditions are poor. Because there's so much, the marketplace itself creates such an intense price competition, it's likely that the third-party sellers who are competing on low cost are going to be sourcing from locations where there is more risk. So yeah, so we specifically looked at sellers who were not international brands, who were not big companies with high name recognition. We sorted the seller list by small business. So Amazon itself creates a sorting checkbox where you can say, show me only the things that are produced by small businesses. So we looked at those, and we looked at sellers who were making significant sales but were within the small business category, pulled their addresses and then did shipping searches which cross-checked them with a number of suppliers. And so these three seller companies are the companies that we managed to trace shipments for. So A to Z for Kids are a company who create like costumes for kids and t-shirts for kids. They also sell some like school uniform products and like sleeping bags and towels and and stretchy t-shirts and stretchy leggings with kind of bright and garish patterns in a nice way. So they're you know, they market themselves as a family company, good with mums. You know, it's a nice business. We checked the shipping data, and there were 1,000 shipments, which is actually quite a large amount between this seller and a company in Pakistan called Ershad Sons Apparels, which is in Faisalabad. And yeah, this product is the product that we chose from that shipping list, but we could have chosen a lot of others. It was they were paying $2.87 for a set. It's retailing on Amazon for $12.99. Ershad Sons Apparels is a small supplier. I can't remember the number of workers, but it's under 200, I think. When we spoke to the LEF spoke to the workers, the minimum wages were not being paid in any of the suppliers that we covered in this report. Workers were getting 32,000 PK Pakistani rupees a month, which was at the time the minimum wage for the unskilled worker. But in order to take home that pay, they were having to work 12 to 14 hours of overtime a week, and there were additional hours required of them every day in also on top of their on top of the legal amount. And they were having to do work on leave days as well in order to achieve that minimum pay that's quoted. So given the fact that they should be compensated for their hours and compensated for their overtime, they were certainly not making the minimum wage, even for their skill bracket also. The workers also didn't get any pay slips and weren't provided with appointment letters, which are both violations of the labour law, and none of them were being registered also for the social security institutions, which is a legal requirement of the employers.
Anna, just a warning, you've got like 2 minutes.
Okay, great. I might push through these then. Ice Cool Fashion, we linked to A&M Fashions in Karachi. Again, this maybe is more notable in that it had a number of piece rate workers, and the piece rate system, I'm hoping that Abbas will talk a bit more about in a minute, really is a system of exploitation in Pakistan. The workers were having to work excessively long hours in order to be able to take home the minimum wage, and were having to make quite extreme quotas. Again, no pay slips, no appointment letters, paid in cash, obscuring the paper trail. They weren't registered for Social Security. Very similar findings for FS Industries, but all of this is available in the report. I'm going to move on to what our recommendations were. So really looking at the millions of garment workers who remain invisible in opaque e-retail supply chains, with there's a real need for retailers to take clearer approaches across the board in order to provide protection for the risk, I guess, that those marketplaces create. So we did a brief survey of retailers about of companies like ASOS and Next and Marks and Spencers and John Lewis about their approach to third-party supply chain due diligence, and found that some UK retailers are developing policy around this. So, for example, ASOS currently are requiring clear, like, internal transparency from their sellers, but also have a deadline of the end of this year that their third party brands ought to be publishing their supplier list publicly, which we think is good practice, although they haven't yet followed through on that. So we're hoping that to keep up the pressure over that. And then there's a number of brands who are also talking about cooperation over remedy solutions, that they would work alongside seller companies or third-party brands to ensure that remedy is delivered in supply chains where there are credible allegations found, and that they would have some kind of visibility over risk within those third-party supply chains as well. But at the moment, the standards are fairly inconsistent, and there isn't really a consensus between retailers about what should be done and what appropriate due diligence really looks like. So we created just a set of recommendations around retailer responsibility that particularly focused over visibility and capacity and collaboration, that retailers should require public supply chain transparency and have internal oversight of the risk, and publicly agree to take joint liability and action for remedy provisions where there are human rights harms and environmental harms found within supply chains through third-party links. Because we really feel that without change, this kind of exploitation will persist behind online marketplaces. And so I guess our ask to Amazon from this report is that, firstly, they address transparency. They should start by requiring that sellers publish their supply chains publicly and transparently, but that Amazon also should have an internal oversight over risk within third-party supply chains, and that they should publicly agree to take part in remedy provision, so that they take responsibility also for some of the human rights violations that inevitably happen within seller supply chains. Yep.
Thanks, Anna.
So that's the report.
Yeah, I think this is really important because I think, as you said, this is a trend for the future. This is like the tiny tip of a massive iceberg in the way that consumer behavior is changing. Let's dig in a little bit more to hear about the research. We'll do questions. We'll have a little time for Q&A, but I'll also keep an eye on the questions. We might answer some online as we go, since we want to make sure we wrap up on time and also hear from our great speakers. So firstly, I'd like to call upon Khalid and to ask about the case studies in the report. They link to a number of smaller suppliers in Pakistan, each with less than 200 workers. And it seems from the report that conditions seem to be worse in these units than some of the larger suppliers. Have you seen a growth in small and medium-sized suppliers in Pakistan in recent years? And what risk does this pose to workers' rights?
Thank you, Joanna, and thank you, Elbil, for doing this very important research based on the production in Pakistan. And this clearly shows a trend that what kind of new or what kind of changing strategy has been adopted by some of the, not some, but many of the brands to sell their products. The important thing is for us based in Pakistan, what are the working conditions for the workers producing for these mostly unknown brands. And asking my team today since morning that if they have come across any new smaller factories especially in Lahore and Faisalabad, and they started sending me information, and I have got more than 30 list of 30 factories which have emerged during the last like 2-3 years. So this is kind of a trend that we see, and these are the factories which are employing ranging from 50 to 200 workers or so. Now, why is this happening in Pakistan? I think first of all, I mean, we have to look at the both ways, the global purchasing practices and the local conditions of industry as well. The industrialists find it easy here to have smaller units or to send their production to the smaller units where they don't have to pay legal minimum wages and where they don't scheme, where they do not have to care about the health and safety issues. The pictures that we have seen from different factories are actually showing that the health and safety conditions are very bad in these factories. The workers that we have talked with, they are saying a lot of things about the harassment. They are saying a lot of things about the unsafe working conditions. The most important issue is wages. Now, due to these reasons, especially after the COVID, we have seen this rise in the smaller units. Maybe that is very much linked with the purchasing practices of the brands and with their selling practices as well. The online business is improving. I mean, going. In Pakistan as well, there are a lot of brands who are selling online. Almost all of the major brands in Pakistan as well, they are selling online their products. They have their own platforms. So this is a growing trend even now. There is no stopping in this trend. So in the absence of implementation of the labor laws, even in the bigger factories, and today I have come across some more information that the brands like Zara, Levi's, I can name these brands also. I mean, their products are also being made in some of the smaller units, and this is subcontracting going on. And the other brands which we do not know the names. I mean, there are a lot of brands which we hear first time names of these brands. They are also present in these smaller units. So in absence of the implementation of the labor laws, even in the bigger factories, you can imagine that what is the condition in these smaller factories. And there are different trends in terms of wages. Some are piece rate. Whenever any worker is fired from these bigger factories, they often are getting employment in these smaller factories, and these smaller factories among the workers are called units. So whenever we ask a worker if he is sacked from the job from any bigger factory, where are you working now? I'm working in a unit. Shift is 12 hours and the conditions are very bad. So this is the trend that we are seeing at the moment in Pakistan, and that I think is not going to decrease. This is on the rise. With more and more, I would add in the conditions not only here in Pakistan, but also I think in level as well for CCC. I know that in Bangladesh, where a trade union leader was killed, Shahidul, he was killed because he was organizing workers in a factory, and that factory was also producing for some of the brands producing, selling at the Amazon. So this is not only in South Asia or other production countries.
I think Khalid, that's a really important point, actually. What we're showing here, I think, is a detailed and substantiated evidence of a particular source country that's likely replicated in many other places. And I think the trend that you've described seeing over the last 10 years is very concerning. And it's very helpful for us to get a picture and understand, what the challenges that we're up against, which is quite something. Thank you. I'd like to ask Abbas about wages at suppliers that your team investigated. They were below minimum levels, and we heard that workers at FS Industries reported taking home between 23,000 and 33,000 Pakistani rupees, which for our attendees is about £59 to £85. So, and I think that's monthly, I think. So yeah, clearly below minimum levels. Can you say a bit about the piece rate system in Pakistan that Anna mentioned is particularly problematic, and how it impacts on workers' access to decent pay?
Thank you. Thank you, LPL, for organizing this webinar and conducting this research. Well, the piece rate system in Pakistan allows employers to pay workers low wages by avoiding transparency and formal contracts. Workers are typically hired through the third-party contractors, leaving them excluded from protection under the labor laws. They have no control over the rates, no guaranteed monthly income, and are denied legal entitlements such as gratuity, social security, overtime pay, and paid leave. Piece rate workers are often work beyond 8 hours a day, yet still earn less than the legal minimum wage set by the government. Although the government revises the minimum wage annually, but there is no enforcement mechanism, and company rarely adjust piece rate to align with the new standards. The entire piece rate system is built on worker exploitation and violation of labor laws, pushing workers outside the ambit of existing legal protections, with no transparency in how rates are set and no mean to challenge unfair practices. Workers are left vulnerable to chronic abuse and economic insecurity. I would also like to share, while we were interviewing workers told us that they were regularly required to work on leave days, as mentioned before by Anna and Khalid Saab, which should by the law be paid double, but this was only paid at standard wage rate. Workers we spoke with were all employed by a third-party employer and paid based on piece rate. Workers were being paid variously 1.25 PKR for 1,200 pieces in a day, PKR 2 for 800 pieces in a day, and 2.5 PKR for 500 pieces in a day. And they were also working for 9 to 10 hours shift to make this orders. Another thing I would like to mention about their take-home pay. Their take-home pay varied from 32,500 to 41,600, but adjusted for a legal 8-hour day, rate fell well below the minimum wage of 38,280 PKR per month for a semi-skilled worker. I would also like to mention here that what workers are expecting from the Amazon to do. The big brand like Amazon, and they are making huge profits from this fashion retail space, but they are not providing appropriate check and balances to ensure protection for workers exposed by the supply chain that have grown around their retails. Amazon should update compliance approach towards seller and third-party brands such as hold to ensure mandatory requirements around the public supply chain, transparency, shared risk mapping, compliance staff capacity, visibility of complaints, and collaboration on remedy in case of supply chain harm. I would also like to mention they should also strengthen the complaint processes to actively investigate the third-party seller supply chain where risks are highlighted. There is also a point to mention that they should ensure that their suppliers employ workers directly on payment contracts and pay them a salary rather than a piece rate, which represent a system of exploitation risk. I would also like to mention that like we had conducted in various factories, the survey of the Amazon, and there are some demands of the workers, what they are asking from the brands. They are asking to conduct a strict audit of the suppliers, discourage the contractual system. They also ask to conduct genuine audits, not the kind we often see at factories. Here, give example of Ali Enterprises and mention that RINA, the Italian firm held in August 2012, certified it as compliant under SA 8000. But unfortunately, in September 2012, a deadly fire incident happened, which took lives of 258 workers. For those who were not aware, Ali Enterprises, a textile garment factory, was producing for KIK, a German retailer. I would also like to mention here that Bryher has played a leading role in advocating for the justice of the victim, but also supported the litigation in both Pakistan and Germany, calling for the corporate accountability of KIK and the main buyer. I would conclude here. Thank you.
Thanks, Abbas. It's a really good point that you ended with, because I think that's the question when you describe the kind of challenges that you're seeing workers experience. This use of piece rate, the difficulty for workers to actually ensure they have decent working conditions. The question, of course, is what can we do? And we're seeing a growth in this trend in corporate supply chains. So the fact that you're advocating for mandatory corporate responsibility is super important, and it's also, I think, a great opportunity for me to bring in Paul and ask about this very topic. What would it actually do to have a mandatory public transparency requirement over seller supply chains? Do you think it would actually reach down to the kind of sellers that we've heard about whose conditions have been described in the report? How could this action by Amazon and others in the garment supply chain, how could it affect both those parties with regards to workers' rights, as well as more broadly in the garment supply chain?
Yeah, thank you. Transparency in and of itself does not solve anything, but it is a necessary precondition for any kind of due diligence. If you don't know which brands produce in which factory, it becomes almost impossible to do any kind of due diligence because you don't know who is the end buyer. So it is an essential condition to strengthen due diligence. but it's not going to be enough on its own, especially because this model of e-tailers, marketplaces, is sort of, it makes things go in the middle. The small brands are not liable because they do not fall usually under mandatory human rights due diligence laws because they are SMEs. And most of the SMEs under current conditions are not held under to the same standards as larger brands. And the e-tailers themselves are only held liable even as the mandatory human rights due diligence laws are weakened as we speak. But they are at least being held liable at the moment for their own production, but not for the third-party brands that are on their platform. Now, that may change once stronger forced labor legislation comes into place, because the forced labor legislation actually has as its punishment the removal of the product from the market, from the EU market at least. And the EU forced labor instrument uses the ILO definition of forced labor, which includes forced overtime. So that may be a really punishing one. But even then, there is a problem, because I can totally see it coming that when remedy is on the table, that it's not a viable mechanism to have 100,000 brands set up their own remedy mechanisms. It's a nightmare for workers. It's a nightmare for NGOs. It's a nightmare for trade unions to read and sue on or file complaints under so many remedy mechanisms. So, in my opinion, it's the marketplace that should take over the responsibility. They should be upfront and say, like, this third-party brand sells on our platform. We are the party where you can lodge a complaint, and we will set up remedy mechanisms. Because otherwise, these smaller brands will either go out of business once they are hit with something, or they vanish and suddenly turn up under another name. So in my firm opinion, it is the e-tailers that have third-party brands on their platform that should take over this responsibility. They could charge a fee for it, just as I charge for logistics and for marketing and for many other things. They could also charge a fee for possible remedy that needs to be paid out. I'm sure there are bean counters at Amazon that are perfectly capable of calculating this. If there's one thing that Amazon is good at, it's calculating. I'm sure you can price this in. So to me, as for the future, yes, transparency is needed. It's good. It's needed for a lot of legislation, but it's also going to be needed for these e-tailers themselves, because they will be held liable for any human rights violations that occur in any of the facilities that their third-party brands are producing in. And yeah, to me, the responsibility for a quick and just remedy mechanism can't be on those third parties, because that's an unworkable mechanism. It should be on the market platforms. They should be the ones that make sure that it happens, make sure that because we've seen so many times that small brands quite often then just disappear. I mean, some of these brands are not really brands. It's like one person sitting somewhere doing drop shipping, more or less. So that's not going to work. So we need to hold these marketplaces accountable, because they're also the ones that making most of the money out of this, and they should be the ones that should be held liable for human rights violations.
That's a really good point, Paul. I think, the drop shipping, of course, is a big thing as well with social media and, with influencers, not in the kind of broad sense, deciding to get branded goods that they then sell. It's definitely a growing area, and I think it's point taken about transparency and the limits of transparency, but there are some benefits, of course, as you said, to understand the supply chain that we're dealing with.
Yeah,
And
also for leverage, because quite
yeah,
often where we see that these smaller units, as they are called, at least for instance in China, are supplying multiple marketplaces. They work for Amazon Haul, they work for Shein, they work for Temu, depending on which day of the week it is. But this transparency is therefore also needed to see who has the most leverage and who, in case something horrible happens, what the respective amounts of remedy should be that the different marketplaces should pay.
yeah, absolutely. I think the leverage point is super important. I think what we are, of course, seeing is a real appetite for more mandatory standards. As you say, it's not even realistic to expect sellers, especially some of these small ones, to do anything. And there's the question of responsibility that I think is really missing here. And we are seeing moves towards better regulation on corporate behavior. I'm going to ask a question to Khalid, but just a reminder in the meantime, we have lost the chat function, but you can put, if you have a question, in Q&A, please do paste them so I know, to make time for the Q&A and so that we don't run out of it. But meanwhile, Khalid, I'd like to ask you about legislation. There's been a lot of fanfare, although of course it's been brought into question around the corporate social due diligence directive that the EU passed and then started a debate. But what would the impact of legislation like that be on companies like Amazon?
Yeah, it's not an easy question to respond to because what we have seen in I mean, this whole due diligence concept depends a lot on the transparency, and we have seen that even the bigger companies lack transparency when it comes to their supply chain. We do not see any because we all know what is happening with the social audit and how badly social audit has failed and how badly the social audit has actually undermined the labor rights in the supply chain. We, in the absence of workers' participation at any level in the production countries like Pakistan, where there is lack of freedom of association and where the workers' management joint councils are being taken as a replacement of the collective bargaining agents in the factories and as a replacement of the trade unions in the factories, the transparency with the participation of the workers is very difficult from the ground. So even if a company is willing to have due diligence, they will have to adopt a strategy which is out of the box. We have suggested to many companies that if you want to really know the working conditions, the real working conditions, you can meet the workers offsite. We and some of the trade unions that we are in contact with the workers, we can facilitate these kind of meetings. So if you really want to get some ideas about what is happening in the factories, you should be able to meet the workers at a place where they do not feel any pressure, because in the factories, due diligence process, all kind of due diligence processes are not going to work effectively, because in the presence of the factory management, workers are not going to talk freely. And this is happening because there is no culture of workers representation, effective representation. There is no culture at the production sites where the workers can freely go to the management with their complaints and submit their complaints. So how can they be allowed to submit their complaints in any due diligence process? The sustainability has become a buzzword in Pakistan. I mean, there are a lot of companies emerging in Pakistan who are working on the sustainability and the complaint mechanism. Some of the NGOs are also involved in developing complaint mechanism for some of the brands. what these complaint mechanisms are doing is that they are mainly collecting information on issues like canteen, issues like clean drinking water, issues like maybe some on health and safety. They're not talking about the real issues regarding the wages, the social protection, the sexual harassment, the abusive patterns in the factory, the long working hours, and the lack of freedom of association. These main issues are not being highlighted at any level. So, with the CSDDD, I think it is very important that the mechanisms are developed where the brands are willing to accept that the workers' representation while developing these mechanisms and while developing the due diligence on the ground, the workers should be represented in an effective way. The trade unions, the NGOs, the broader mechanism can be developed where the workers can feel free to talk about their issues, and then only I think the due diligence can happen. Now, the companies like Amazon, where the brands selling on Amazon are producing at very small units, this is even difficult to have due diligence from these workplaces. So I think it's very important to actually change this culture, to actually change the purchasing practices, to have a very open conversation where the workers are also taking part in this conversation to adopt a strategy that the due diligence can happen effectively at the bigger and the smaller workplaces at both levels.
Thanks, Khalid. I think this question of remediation, which also Paul introduced, is it's very evident how crucial it is to really resolving the worker rights issues that we're seeing in these factories. And Paul touched on this trend, this Amazon haul, which launched in the UK in May as a competitor to Temu and Shein, which we all know is basically a hyper consumption, I call it. I think I'm not seeing questions, so I've got a question that I'd like to put to Anna about the movement just generally. I think I mentioned in the introduction that we're very aware of what conditions for workers in warehouses in the UK for Amazon. Of course, I made a small comment about tax, which has been a topic of campaigning in the UK. There's the Make Amazon Pay movement, which is pushing for worker rights and protections in Amazon supply chains around the world. So, Anna, why should this issue also be a part of the global struggle?
I think, as I said at the beginning, because the third-party seller supply chains make up the vast majority of the Amazon marketplace, actually this is the struggle. And I think that we're only by uniting together these worker rights struggles in those supply chains alongside the ones that of the distribution workers and the workers in the warehouses and the workers in the head office. We have to kind of come together with all the movements who are trying to hold Amazon to account to really align our messages. And I guess the Make Amazon Pay coalition for us is really vital, and we're calling out to others who are already organizing in the union movement around worker rights in Amazon specific facilities to also take on this struggle, to say the rights in seller supply chains are all of our struggle, and the rights of the workers in the warehouses are all of our struggle. So by uniting together, we're able to do something to create actually effective pressure. And I do also think that the data point it could be really impactful also for strengthening the wider Make Amazon Pay movement if it was that Amazon was holding a data set that was all of the supply chains for all of the sellers. I mean, that's a very significant resource which we could be calling for them to search and take responsibility over, and we could bring in a whole load of struggles to link to Amazon and its responsibility. And I think it could really strengthen the clear line of being able to hold Amazon to account. So I I think this struggle is our struggle, and it's a bigger struggle, which is about a lot of Amazon campaigns globally.
Thanks, Anna. Maybe Paul, just very briefly, because I think what Anna's made clear is that this is part of a bigger struggle for Amazon. But as we know, Amazon is just one retailer amongst many. So how do you see the impact of these kind of retail developments? And what should companies be requiring of these sellers?
Yeah, as I said, I do think it will have to be the marketplaces. So the Amazons, the ASOSes, the Sheins, the Temus, that will have to stand in for everything that they sell on their platform. They have to be the guarantor that worker rights are upheld. They have to build a system where there are resources, where there are clear remedy mechanisms available. I compare it to if you buy something that is poisonous in a supermarket, you also can go to the supermarket to say, like, could this please be solved? And this model will continue because it's advantageous, because it absolves the small brands who fall out of any legislation, and the marketplaces currently also don't fall under the legislation for the stuff that is sold by third parties. So it's a legal loophole that is being exploited. And therefore, we need to unite to, well, see if we can get it into legislation. But the current climate is very anti-legislation and very deregulation. But any movement that we have achieved already on things like due diligence has come down to campaigning years before it became law. So we do have power. We have to ask for them to do that. Because there is no way in which all these smaller brands will ever achieve a remedy mechanisms, but if we have all the data from the sellers, and of course they have it, most of it already. You cannot tell me that Amazon does not have most of these suppliers already in their database, because they're doing logistics.
Yeah.
And in the case of the Shein model, they actually subcontract to all of these thousands of small units. So they have them in their hyper modern system. It's not that this data is not available. It's not that they hide it. So that should be a focus of us. And yeah, the current period is not very conducive on strengthening human rights due diligence, although there is encouraging movements in parts of Asia. Thailand has a law in the making. Korea, Japan, Taiwan are thinking about laws. So just because in the EU the tide has been not in our favor does not mean that it will forever go back. So we have to be ready for that, and we have to also rely on our campaigning power to say, like, and on consumers to say, like, hey, I need to know where my clothes were made and under what conditions.
Absolutely. I think the great opportunity that we have with this report is some evidence behind, what we suspect is the case, that we can point to and to illustrate why this problem is not specific to this particular supply chain, but is very likely endemic from this great research that Labour Behind the Label, together with the partners in Pakistan, have pulled together. So I want to say a big thank you to everybody for attending, of course, to our brilliant panelists, to Abbas, Haider, to Khalid Mahmood, to Paul, Roeland. Big thank you to Anna for organising this, putting together the report. Now, you will, as someone who's registered to the webinar, receive a copy of the report, a short survey, which would be really grateful if you could fill out, and a social media pack so you can share and maximize the impact of these findings. That will come to you via the email that you registered with, and you can also find it all on our website too. So we'll put this recording on I think YouTube, and of course follow us on our channel so you can get updates on Labour Behind the Label. We're on the usual places. So this just leads me to say a very big thank you for attending, and we hope this is the beginning of a bigger conversation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.